Welcome. There you go. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar, AI and the Environment. We're very glad to have you with us today. I'm Rebecca Miller, the incoming coordinator of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. Before we get started, I get to run through some housekeeping notes to help us run everything smoothly. So here we go. First, please keep your microphone muted during the presentation to avoid any interruptions. And we kindly ask you to remain respectful to our presenter and the fellow attendees throughout the session. We will reserve some time at the end for Q&A. If you have questions during the presentation, please drop them into the chat, or during the Q&A time, you can raise your hand and we will try to get to everyone. A recording of today's webinar, along with presentation slides, will be shared with all registered attendees afterward. It will also be posted on the SLI website. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sarah Tribelhorn. She's the Sciences and Sustainability Librarian at San Diego State University, and she is an SLI Advisory Board member. She's going to provide a practical overview of what AI is, how it works, and how it is becoming part of everyday life, while also examining its environmental footprint, including energy use, data centers, and electronic waste, all to support an informed conversation about responsible technology use and a more sustainable future. Sarah, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that I get my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Rebecca, and the SLI for inviting me. I am a board member, but inviting me to do this. This is one of my passions, so I do apologize to anybody that might have heard this before or iterations of this. But I just feel that the more that we can share this information, the better. So I am going to just speak about the AI and its environmental impact, and just the importance of kind of what we to really consider all the aspects of AI, as well as its positive use. So before I begin, I just want to check in. How are you all feeling today? You can throw it in the chat. I'm just going to see if I can see the chat along the way. But I do feel it's important with all of this going on that just to check in, and you don't even have to do that. Just do a check-in of how you are. You're tired, motivated, stressed. I have to say I feel all those things in once. So worried, overwhelmed, frazzled. I think that these things are all very valid, and I'm sure that anybody knows, I mean, with everything that is going on, and also in this field, we're probably feeling all of these things, hopeful, cold. I will send some San Diego warmth your way. Anybody? It is not sunny today in San Diego, but thoughts for all of those in this terrible weather. Sleepy, warm in New Zealand. Yay! Thank you for joining us from so far away. You can continue putting those in there and just do that check-in with yourselves. So what I'm going to be chatting about today is just briefly what AI is. So this is very brief. Most of you probably know, but I just wanted to make sure that we have the context for that, for those that might not. I will touch on the ethical considerations of AI because that very much falls into the sustainability realm. The hidden costs, which is really those environmental impacts, and the AI relates to data centers, which is why that is in here. And then, so that it is not all doom and gloom, what we can do individually and collectively. So on to what is AI. So artificial intelligence is that branch of computer science that aims to make machines smart, essentially. You can interact with it constantly. I mean, we interact with it constantly. Long before it really became that AI was doing all of these things. So it was things like speech recognition with our Siri and Alexa, to movie or music recommendations with your Netflix and Spotify recommendations. And then as really what I'm probably referring to mostly here is our text or image generation or video generation, such as using the apps such as ChatGPT or DALL-E or Google Gemini, any one of those. And these are the systems that work by processing massive amounts of information to train models, learning patterns from data instead of being explicitly programmed. So these AI systems work primarily by learning from data to identify these patterns, make decisions, and then perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. So the process is often powered by a core concept called machine learning. And the system uses algorithms, which is essentially a set of instructions or rules to process this data. And the most common method, especially in modern AI, is deep learning, which uses artificial neural networks, which is essentially software structures designed to loosely mimic the interconnected neurons of the human brain. Once the AI model is trained, it can be given new unseen data, and it applies the patterns to it has learned during the training phase to this new input and generates an output, either a prediction or a decision. And in many advanced systems, the AI receives feedback on its decisions. If the output is correct, the model is reinforced, and if it's incorrect, the system then adjusts. So that's often why you get varying results, and they're not always accurate in some of the large language models and the different apps. But the iterations of this allows AI to continuously refine its accuracy and performance over time, improving without needing to be explicitly programmed and reprogrammed. But the downside of this is that it needs intensive computational power. So you know that when you're running your computer or a laptop, it gets really hot and it has that fan in it. So essentially, all of the data is stored in data centers on this massive scale, and that needs to be kept cool, which is where the electricity comes in. So in these large data centers, to keep them cool, the systems often require obviously electricity, but also large amounts of water. So before I continue on, I do want to say that I'm just presenting you with really some of the facts of this. Obviously, I do have an opinion on it, so otherwise I wouldn't be here. But I am against AI shaming. So I borrowed this approach from Dr. Maha Bali when I attended one of her presentations from the American University in Cairo. And it really is to have a compassionate approach. So I'm bringing this up just because I know that in my institution we have very divided opinions on AI, and I'm sure that that is probably true across the board. So although AI has the potential to transform education, there are these ethical and environmental considerations that must be taken into account. And it's also okay to hold multiple views and be excited about AI despite its ethical issues. And it's also okay to reject AI despite its potential. So we can hold room for all of these different considerations. So checking in again, it's always good to know who's in the room. And this also comes from Dr. Bali. And I would just love to know how you describe your attitude towards AI. So are you an instrumentalization wizard? Are you playfully chaotic, a skeptical pragmatist, capitalist extractor, a data guardian, footprint alarmist, shutdown brigade, or a human-centric purist, or something else? And I do have to say, you don't have to just be one of these. You can be several. I feel that I'm kind of on the spectrum of a couple of these. Oh, that's great. So we have 6 to 7, human-centric purist, 3 and 4. I do love this. So this is really great because it looks like we have various representations and all are needed in this. Thank you for sharing that. And this is really nice to understand if you are giving any talks on this to understand where people in the room fall. So I'm going to move on now because I just want to make sure we have enough time for questions at the end. Before we get into the environmental aspects, I do have to say that you can't have any conversation of AI without including some of the ethical considerations. And these include, but are not limited to some of these, because this would be a whole webinar on its own. So privacy and data protection, bias and fairness, transparency, the human AI collaboration, and equity and access. So beyond the ecological impact, AI can perpetuate existing biases and harm groups most vulnerable to adverse environmental effects. As professionals who value equity, we must select and contract with companies that use diverse and unbiased data sets. Promoting transparency in AI algorithms builds trust, and protecting user privacy is crucial for ethical implementation. In addition, ethnic, minority, and underrepresented groups are not always represented, and the AI technology at the end of the day is only as good as the data it uses. So it is important to understand the motivation of the specific company that is promoting the tool and also the big data centers that are storing that information. So it's important to look at their information on the models they use, how they were trained, and other policies on their websites if they are available so that you can make informed ethical decisions on how to decide or advocate in your libraries about what tools to use. You will get these slides afterwards, and I've linked a rubric that we use in our library for some of this that you're welcome to use to change it for your own use, but just consider some of these ethical implications. So onto the hidden costs, which really are the environmental impact of AI. I'm first going to focus on the energy and water use, and we'll mostly focus on that. So training and operating AI models uses massive amounts of electricity. In a 2023 study, it was found that generating just one image of generative AI, such as ChatGPT, could use as much energy as charging an average smartphone. Companies such as Google and OpenAI are requiring additional energy production and are also looking to broker or have brokered deals. I'm sure that you might have seen in the news some of this going down with energy companies, and they have some funding from the federal government as well for nuclear power, such as 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. And in Virginia and some other states, they are looking to reinstate some of the coal plants. So that is what's going on, but that is not the only energy that they are using. There are some that are exploring greener options. I'm focusing mainly today on the US. There are several places in Europe that are using the energy, for example, that comes off these or the heat that comes off them to actually power or heat homes. I know that is in Ireland, and there are several other options. I'm just really focusing on home. A really good example that I did find of one of these greener sides is that there is a company in Reno, Nevada, that where a data center is being developed by a company called Crusoe using old EV batteries in collaboration with a battery recycling company called Redwood, as well as solar power to start powering these data centers. Beyond AI, the energy, AI also has a major water footprint. So data centers require immense amounts of water for cooling. A 2023 Cornell study estimated that by 2027, the water needed for AI could reach 1.7 trillion gallons per year, and that's more than half the UK uses in a single year. However, on the other side of this, there are new technologies being developed for cooling. Microsoft are working on a totally closed system that will not require water. So some of this is contextual as well. It depends on some of the reporting. They obviously, or at this stage, I have found very few sort of peer-reviewed journal or articles that I could really draw on for this data. Most of it is by the companies themselves or by tech. Business Insider do a bunch. So it really is contextual and really trying to find and make sure that you understand where that data is being drawn from and that the data is kind of true in what you're looking at. So that's the only thing that I will say is that I have chosen these things to highlight this, but there are some that say that it is not as bad, and we'll touch on some of that going down the line. But it's also important to remember the context of where a lot of this data is being provided from. So I just want to touch on a data center for those of you that may not know. This comes from Dr. Mary Finley Burke that from the University of Richmond in Virginia, who gave the keynote at the Virginia Library Association, if anybody attended that. A data center is a building or a dedicated space within a building or a group of buildings used to house computer systems and associated components, such as the telecommunications and storage systems. It's a large group of network computer systems typically used by organizations for the remote storage, processing, and distribution of large amounts of data. And there are various types of data centers. They can be defined as enterprise, co-location, or hyperscale. I'm mainly going to be talking about the hyperscale data centers today, but the enterprise are privately owned by a single company or organization. So at my organization, SDSU, we do have a data center, and I'm part of the California State University system, and we have a data center that is part of that, that we are all able to use. The co-location, which is very common if you're actually going down the rabbit hole and looking at this, is where a company owns it but really rents out space to different businesses. So they will maintain it and organize it, and they're a little smaller. So they basically, you just rent the space and you pay for that space, and they cover the power and cooling, and just really it's a shared facility owned by a service provider, and they do all their own maintenance. And then the hyperscale data centers, which are the massive, highly scalable data centers, are typically operated by the large tech companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And those are the ones that support the massive workloads and cloud distributions and cloud services. So since I mentioned cloud, I do like this, and this also comes from Dr. Brock, and I really like this because we have done such a great job of euphemisms to really hide the impact, such as streaming, cloud. If you just go into any of these, you'll really see that we've used these sort of ephemeral words to explain what we're doing. So, in some of the teachings that I do, I always just remind people that the cloud has a physical space, and not everybody really thinks about that. It's just not up, in the middle of nowhere. It is these data centers that require cooling to stay operational. So, the cooling systems typically in these data centers are through pipes to absorb the heat from the service, which is liquid cooling, or through evaporative cooling. The ones that use liquid cooling, they usually add some like chemicals to them to make sure that they, don't scale, things like that. So it is not potable. That water can't be reused. And obviously, the evaporative cooling, the water is lost into the air. So this is what a hyperscale data center looks like. Typically, um, they store and compute their data in these hyperscale centers, and library vendors also use these. They typically have about 5,000 servers, so they're all just stacked up in different rows, and they are used for AI and cloud computing and require more electricity, obviously, and water than standard smaller data centers. The AI use is increasing its water footprint exponentially via these centers. So asking ChatGPT a few questions can require the equivalent of about a 16-ounce bottle of water. So for my institution, and we will get there, we have about 100,000 subscriptions of just ChatGPT. So the math on that, if everyone used that and asked ChatGPT a really simple query, it would come out to about 12,000 gallons of water for just one query. As I did mention in the beginning, this is contextual. They are all a little bit different and they are improving, but that is just the scale of this to kind of illustrate that. So recently, because most of the things that I had found were kind of like 23 and 24, Business Insider, however, had done a lot of research. I have linked this, but unfortunately, you do have to have a subscription. My library didn't have a subscription, but I was kind of desperate to find this information. So I did take out a subscription, and it was really useful because they have done a lot of investigative journalism on this. And they found that 40% of data centers in the US are sited in areas of high or extremely high water stress. and the annual energy consumption of the permitted data centers, so those were ones that they found that had permits or that were going to be produced in the near future, were projected to be 149.6 to 239 terawatts per hour per year. So just for context, on the low end of the scale, that is equivalent to the total electricity needs in Ohio for 2023. And on the high end, it's the entire state of Florida for 2023. So that is quite a large amount of electricity. So that brings me on to where our data centers are located. So this company called Data Center Map, you can click on the link and you can actually see where the data centers are. So these are not all the data centers, because some of these are not, they have not had this information available. But this is also a company that is supporting some of those smaller businesses that I mentioned earlier that are renting out space for the data centers. So there is a little thing there that says request a quote. So you can go on that to see how much space you would need if you did want to store data. So, that is kind of a commercial thing as well. But based on a different 2025 Business Insider report, they had their own data centers, and they determined the location of these not through the companies like Google, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Azure, because a lot of that is not disclosed. But through their journalism, they discovered that all of these, and in that picture before, it shows you that they all have to have these big generators, because if the power goes down, they have to be able to keep their servers up. And it was through the Clean Air Act that they discovered where these generators were and realized, kind of pinpointed where the data centers were. So through that, they located a bunch of those. And one of the reasons why these data centers are where they are is because of tax incentives. So through their reporting, they discovered that a lot of these have zero tax on building materials, machinery, equipment. They have preferential rates on water and electricity, and they are developing policy with local government to provide jobs. However, in this report, it also noted that the jobs are mainly for construction. Once these data centers are up and running, there are limited jobs, maybe 3 or 4 people actually required to maintain them. So a lot of this is also in Dr. Mary Finley Brock's work that is specifically focused on Virginia, but does apply to a lot of the different states. So what else, aside from AI, requires data centers? Basically everything that we do. So as libraries, most of us have our enormous catalog and collections up in the cloud for all our e-resources. They require these data centers. Obviously, our discovery systems are there. We probably all have the same vendors, or most of us have the same vendors. Our library resource guides, our digitized archives, and then just in your everyday things, streaming media, email. We are a Google campus, so times that by 100,000 users across our CSU system. Health records, online banking, all of our banking, online gaming, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, all of that, our social media apps, photo storage, messaging apps. So everything that we use to make our lives easy and operational for the everyday. So I did just want to note that in the literature as well, it is becoming more and more apparent that if you're going to, I mean, I've showed the big doom and gloom of these data centers, but as per our individual footprint, if you're comparing it to other things, Hannah Ritchie, who does a lot of work in the environmental field, had noted that the energy use per query of Google Gemini is about 30 times less than 12 months ago, for example. So all the AI large language models are becoming more efficient as they were trained. They were much less efficient as they were being trained, and are becoming more and more efficient with more data. And about 10 simple prompts equals about 1.5 minutes of watching TV. And as I mentioned, that whatever you look at is contextual. There are various data points in all of these. But there was another report from Mirko Lorenz in the Data Wrapper in 2025 that equated this to about zero point 0.0 tons of carbon over 13 years of 10 questions a day. So it's really kind of small when you look at the big scheme of things. There are other options that you could do. You could live car free, which would save you 2.4 tons, switch to green heating, obviously retrofit your house, buy green electricity. There are various other options that you could do. So just by being careful with AI, it is relatively small. And this, in terms of the energy consumption, it was just another way to look at it from a different report. Your just small chat GPT query is relatively small, and obviously the more complex questions that you ask, it's going to get bigger and bigger. But it's all kind of relative and individually is not a big impact. However, I have this up here. I just would like to say thank you to Kate if she's on this, because I was really in a conundrum to how to get this across and the importance of us doing this, because I've been to several different webinars where the message thing that I have got is that this is not important on an individual level. And I just want to reiterate that I personally feel that it really is. And drawing on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant from the 1700s, we must view our individual AI usage through the lens of categorical imperative. So act only according to the maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will it that it should become a universal law. So if every individual treated the massive energy and water demands of AI as a negligible personal cost, the resulting universal law would lead to a logical contradiction. So the total collapse of the environmental resources required to sustain the very technology being used. And again, I just say that it's contextual, but I do like to kind of draw on that as well. So just so that you know, in some of these bigger institutions, and I know I'm in an academic institution, but we have licensed agreements across the CSU for ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, Google Notebook LM, our Zoom AI, Adobe Firefly, Camingo, which faculty can use for lesson planning, and Google Notebook LM. And then to support this, we, as well as our other data storage needs, we have license agreements for data storage with Google, Microsoft Azure, and Amazon Web Services. And then, as I mentioned, outside of our institutions, our library vendors have data storage agreements with all of these companies too. And it's very hard to find out exactly which data center your information is being stored in. So that is just something that we are working on in our library to try and determine the closest ones are probably the ones where our information is being stored, and just looking at the impact of that. So I do also want to say that beyond the energy and water use, there is the issue of resource depletion, the increased demand for rare earth metals needed for computer chips. And I know that in the news, there's kind of like the race to find these rare earth elements. So politics plays into this as well. There's also the question of long-term sustainability and e-waste. That company in Reno was trying to make sure that they were reusing EV batteries, but that, we don't really reuse the tech that comes out of these big data centers. So that a question there too. And we also need to assess the longevity of the AI technologies and insist on answers to critical questions like, is there a plan for recycling or purposing of the AI hardware from these companies? And how is the pollution being mitigated? There's very little. Most of the companies, I know Google is probably one that is relatively easy to find. If you go onto their site, they have a section of sustainability and environmental impact, but there is not really policy that you can see there. It's just kind of some facts in how they are improving over time. So I do also want to say it's not all doom and gloom. AI is not solely a source of drain, resource drain. It can also be a powerful tool for environmental good. It helps with climate modeling, optimizing energy use and smart grids, and sustainable farming. There are lots and lots of examples of that. And the push for green AI is leading to more efficient large language models with algorithms that minimize the number of computations required, reducing the energy consumption and water use. And it's not often at the forefront of a lot of articles about the green energy and water use, but there are a lot of companies that are working to really include that. And Microsoft is one of them, trying to work with like energy, solar and wind energy as well. So turning individual active action into collective action, these are just some things that we can do. One of the things is just personally environmental awareness and advocacy. Just keep yourself informed and share knowledge. So I personally try to go to as many webinars as possible and try to read as much as I can. Talk to your representatives and leaders, engage on social media, advocate for standardized procedures to measure the environmental impact of AI. Some of these apps allow you to actually track your footprint, but not all of them do, and it's not always easy to find. So some of do you can kind of research some of that. In terms of our personal, professional, and institutional influence. In our library, we have developed AI guidelines for decision making. It's not perfect, but it's a start. You can advocate where possible for sustainable AI procurement. And engage with the vendors. When I go to any conferences, I have been trying to ask the vendors. Very often, the salespeople don't know this information. So I have asked, like, where do you store? I know that you use cloud services. What companies are you using? Most of them are using Microsoft Azure. Not all, but and then ask them for a breakdown of Scope 3 emissions. And that's usually beyond the person who's in the sales, but they can find that information for you. Um, and then as librarians, what we can do. So it's similar to on the personal level, we can raise awareness by developing programs on both environmental and social impacts of AI, things like this. Collaborate with our IT staff to implement energy efficient solutions for our systems. And I'm sure that a lot of that, and especially with the SLI, if you're doing the SLCP, that is part of it, and just analyzing that. We can educate users on the ethical AI use and digital sustainability. Um, I did link to two tools at the end, and you'll get them in the slides that can be used to assess AI. One is a rubric that I developed, and the other is an AI company's dashboard that shows the amount of amount of energy being used for different AI applications and models. So it's very cool because it shows you the exact model. You might have to go in to see the parent company, and you might need to do that research on your own, but it's all the way from text generation to video generation, and the different amounts that they use. And it is an open company, so it is all pretty transparent and just really interesting to see. And then another way you could do it is supporting research into sustainable AI practices by taking some of these actions. Um, we can work, I think, sorry, I went on to the next thing. Um, in terms of the AI practices, just supporting research in these areas to make sure that we are using it responsibly and contributing to a healthier, more equitable future. And if you have any other ideas, it would really be great to see or hear. I mean, these are just resources that we are using, but I think collectively we can probably share different ways that we, as librarians, can do this work. As decision makers, we really need to consider the needs of our users and avoid unnecessary AI application. Essentially every unnecessary application leads to resource strain. Um, this is just an example, and we are going to work on this if you want to come to the next webinar on digital declutter drop-ins and what that looks like. I can share this for anybody wanting to do that, and we will go into more detail in the next thing, but it's really just erasing the awareness and generation of that. And then what I also just wanted to include here was just some upcoming webinars. If anybody is interested, there is actually one today. Um, Oregon State University have an AI literacy center, and they are very gracious to share all this information. They always put it out, and welcome anybody who wants to join this. Um, and they have a variety of topics. And I want to say they do at least one a month, and anybody can register. And they do have them available afterwards as well. Um, the MIT Technology Reviews is another one that has really good and interesting information. They have one on Wednesday, the 28th, on why AI companies are better on the next gen nuclear, and then our SLI one on digital declutter on the 26th. So I just want to say thank you for listening, thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest. I'm excited that there is so much interest in this. This is kind of like a new field, an emerging field, so it's hard to really tell where this is going, and I'm just learning as I go, but willing to share whatever resources if anybody wants to reach out to ask some more. The next one is the references, which I will share. I'm going to stop sharing right now so that we can answer any questions. I kind of screened through this because I wanted to make sure that I covered everything, and I was worried that I wouldn't have time for that. Um, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And I see there are some in the chat. I'm just going to go back up. Data centers. Yeah, I did not mention the data centers are often built in lower socioeconomic areas, just like the big freeways and factories, and marginalized and underrepresented communities suffer the biggest impact. I did not include a lot of information on this. Our library is very concerned about this based on the fact that we have all these licenses for ChatGPT. So we are working as part of our climate action plan on campus in our library to determine where our data centers are. And we are hoping to then use GIS and ArcGIS to overlay where these underrepresented communities are, and the bigger issues. And I know there are several other researchers doing this for their local areas. And we're not gatekeeping any of this information. I think that this, once this is kind of published and we know what we're doing, we'll share it out. But this all leads to sustainability in our resilient communities, where we need to really be doing this work and seeing as much as we can to make it transparent. It's the transparency that's really hard. So part of what we are doing, which was based on Dr. Finley Brock's work in Virginia, is to collate like the policies. So I'm in California, so we're looking at California policies around these. We're looking at these like kind of new provisions that are coming out. We're looking at obviously the EPA. We're looking at the state organizations and federal organizations for energy, and any type of legislation around that. So we're trying to collect the legislation that is impacting these communities as well as the environmental. And I didn't touch on this because it was just the environment, but there is a tremendous health impact in this too. The Business Insider report did predict the numbers, and it was astounding of how it's going to impact these communities in terms of their health, and just the monetary value of it was enormous. So I don't want this to be all doom and gloom, because there are things that we can say, but I do think it's important that we just are transparent with some of this information. There are loads of questions here. If anybody wants to open their mics and ask them, you're welcome to. You want to see the resources again? I'll share my screen. These were just some of the references that I used for this, and there's some of them that are linked in there, and you will get them in the slides too. You'll have them as active. Um,
Sarah, this is Rebecca. We do have some questions that we've collated from through the chat. Yeah, I think they're in a chat directly to you, but we're also I can give them to you verbally. I'm just getting
okay,
them. Um, yeah, one.
sure.
Okay. Uh, so 1 second. Uh, Thanks everyone for your patience while we sort out our process here. 1 second. It's not, there it is. Hold on. Just add some, see if others. There's a question on where we can find data on world data centers outside of the United States. Is there a resource for that?
There is that data center map. If you just even Google data center map, you will find that that actually has world resources too. And the Dr. Mary Finley Brooks resources that are linked here have a lot of information. They are relevant. Obviously, she's focusing on Virginia, but she does focus on why Virginia is important as this data center alley in terms of the world context. And you will see that Virginia is a major supplier of these data centers to globally. So there are underwater cables, and there is a really great graphic in that. So the data center map is a really good one because it's not just US based. You can kind of search in that. And then Dr. Mary Finley Brooks' resource as well is another really good one.
Okay, great. We have several questions that have streamed through the chat, so I'm just going to give you another one. Earlier
Sure.
in your talk regarding water use and etc., we had a listener ask, so does that mean that more water is evaporating into the air and then causing all these larger hurricanes and storms all over the world? Because the science goes, what comes up must come down. So a lot more rain in the world because water is evaporating? Question mark. Can you address
I
that?
do not know. I do not know, unfortunately. I would guess that it's compounding the impact of climate change in some way, but I honestly am not sure that that is. I mean, I did not in any of my research come across any information on that, but I think that drawing water out of the earth in the first place is compounding the climate change issues, and the fact that a lot of these data centers are in water impoverished areas. For example, our California ones are in Arizona, and in Nevada in water scarce areas. Um, and so, I think it just compounds it. But I don't know that there is actually any data on that climate science, but I definitely know. And places like the EPA, it's very hard to track that right now. So, I think there are independent organizations tracking some of that, but I don't think it's really transparent.
Okay, great. Thanks for addressing that. We have, sort of related to the global issues. There's a question about data centers and their physical structures being impacted by war or unrest, some things like that. If a data center is destroyed, burnt down, what happens to what's in the quote the cloud unquote? Is that lost forever? How do we think about that, securing that information for the future?
Yeah, that is a good question. And that's also comes, I mean, I just touched on at the beginning at your privacy and your data security is those big data centers that are storing a lot of that information are not going to be the ones in those areas. They probably are going to be in areas where they are relatively safe, which is also why it's hard to sometimes find the location of them. They don't want that information to be disclosed for security reasons. So, I mean, we talk about this in library world of how many backups you need. Do you need a backup of a backup of a backup of a backup? They have all those backups. So, I think that there is a high chance of them being hacked, definitely. So, in the middle of our semester in our last semester, there was a Canvas. Anybody in the academic world will know that there was a Canvas outage, and that was AWS. One of their servers went down, and that hit the entire US in the Canvas system, which is the operational system that they use for students. So there is that high chance, but they are probably not going to be in those. They're going to be in more impoverished areas, like in safer areas, like in the US, where those communities just don't know the impact of the environment. They don't necessarily have the education around it. They're not being supported by their local areas, and they're not going to be like in war-torn areas. They're probably going to be in other places. I do know in some of the reporting that I read, China, for example, is buying up farmland in the US in some places for data centers specifically. Um, so, it's not just the US that has data centers here. There are other countries around the world that have data centers here, and they're mostly going to be in secure destinations.
Great. Thanks for that. We have a going on a totally different direction. We have a couple questions about sort of community association industry, or rather library field expertise. We have questions about examples of libraries that are doing specific good work in this area, and also any associations or library organizations that are addressing this. If they're in the resources, that's great. We can point to that. Or do you have anyone in particular you want to call out other than the SLI? That's also in the chat. So
Yeah, at this stage, it's mainly the SLI that we're trying to collate this. I think there are individual groups, but because it's so new and it is very political as well, depending which side you are really focusing on, um, a lot of, like in California, I'm allowed to do this work really easily and openly, and my institution supports it as well. They are wanting this relatively transparent. It's not as easy to do it in all states. So at this stage, I think that it is Clear are doing this through their task force as well. So I know there is some work through Clear, but it's all really, really new. There's nothing that's been published as such yet. We're just kind of in these tiny little community of practices, just working with each other. So that's pretty much where we are right now. And we will share through the SLI definitely, and Sustain RT as well. Any of these, we're trying to make sure that our resources are as open as possible for anybody wanting to use them, replicate them for their own, contextualize them for their own institutions. Um, and not all of these are librarians, but we can contextualize it from, like just the research that they are doing.
yeah. Okay. We have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to bring forward another couple questions. Someone asked, or actually said, they'd love to know how instructional librarians are encountering this topic in the classroom. Are there any librarian-led conversations with students about digital impacts on the environment?
I just from my institution, I mean, if anybody else has things that they are doing, we started that digital declutter as a response, and that's just a drop-in workshop that we have with our students, and it's really a conversation. And it really was in response to students being anxious that it was not being addressed in the depth of detail that they would like. There is a micro credential that they do at our institution, and they were really worried about the bigger impact. So it's just a conversation really at this stage about what you can do and the impact of it. And more have been asking for it, and different departments have been asking for it. So you're welcome to take any of these resources and contextualize it for your own and do your own workshops on this. And it's just that conversation. We opened a space in the library just to have that conversation. And I would love to know other librarians that are addressing this.
Yeah, as with the SLI. Um, another question just came through. Would you happen to have some data on that compares resource usage across different industries, or could you point us in that direction?
Absolutely. I will add some information specific to that. I think it is the International Energy Agency has that contextualized, and in that, data centers are apparently only using about 40% of the energy use overall. So that is like across industries. So it is not as high as some had thought it would be, but contextually, it is still relatively high in the big scheme of things. But I will share that. I'll link that in the resources. I'll make sure to include that.
Great, thank you. Okay, yeah, we have a hardware kind of question from earlier in the conversation that if you know, that'd be great. There's a question, has server hardware connectivity improved beyond Ethernet cables plugged into CPUs? I hope we're not still relying on 1980s technology as the backbone of our digital knowledge. Can you speak to that? Do you know?
I can't speak deeply to that, but I do know that it is improving. So it definitely has improved and become more efficient. So just as the chips in your computer become more efficient, the phone chips, we had big clunky phones in the beginning, everything comes smaller. The same has happened for data centers. So they really are a lot more efficient than they were, but I don't know the actual details.
Okay, great. Well, I think that we've moved through the questions we've seen. We'll scan the comments and see if there's anything we missed. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the information. Of course, we will be back with our next webinar in the next month, I believe, and we'll send that information out to you. Please feel free to visit us at sustainablelibrariesinitiative.org for more resources related to the SLI, and we'll be looking at what's surfaced here for future conversations. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to Sarah. Have a good day.